Welcome, my name's Damien Burley and I'm Managing Director for S&P Capital IQ in EMEA. We're here today to talk about the M&A activity in the Nordic region, which jumped in value by 27.8% in 2012, while at the same time contracting by 30.4% in Western Europe as a whole, according to the research conducted by S&P Capital IQ into privately held and public listed businesses of Denmark, Finland, Norway and Sweden. With me to discuss the findings of this research are S&P Capital IQ, Silvina Aldeca-Martinez and Pavle Sabic. Welcome, thank you for joining us. Pavle, I wonder if I could just start with you. This is very interesting data, not surprising that the industry's contracted to some degree, but how the Nordics come out of this is pretty impressive. So, Pavle, why did the M&A activity in the Nordics increase to such an extent?
There's several aspects that kind of contribute to the fact that the Nordic M&A was quite buoyant, contrasting that to the Eurozone. First off, macroeconomic figures seem to be quite stable. We had good GDP growth for the Nordics, whereas the Eurozone actually contracted in some instances. Up until the Q3, Q4 last year, the figures are coming in and it seems the Nordics did quite well in that respect with GDP. Also, when we look at S&P ratings, they were quite optimistic about the credit markets of the Nordics. So they had a AAA rating for all four of those countries and a stable outlook as well. You look at the aspects of the general market and how they perceive the credit markets and the sovereigns, and the market-derived signals, which are a CDS indicator of these markets, were also very positive. They were a AAA as well. They're a lowercase rating, they're quantitative, but essentially they're saying that there hasn't been much volatility in those credit markets and in terms of the market sentiment towards those Nordics. Also, and what we discussed in the research is the fundamentals for both privately held and public held Nordic companies. So they were very good and they increased the kind of attention that they brought in M&A activity in the Nordics.
And was that linked to the strength of the banks and the fact that the rest of banks weren't hit hard in that region, or is it a separate trend overall?
What we did is we looked at non-financials in this, so we look at purely at corporations. And we found that the fundamentals for the private sector and public sector were very good. If we start off with revenue, we actually witnessed some double-digit revenue growth in these aspects. There were some sectors which did decrease, but generally across the four countries, across all sectors, there were some very, very good instances of that. Operational statistics were very, very good. Current ratios for these corporations were very good as well. So this all led to increased confidence in that region in terms of the fundamentals and M&A activity.
And just bringing you in now, Silvina, I think SMEs played a large part in this M&A activity overall. I mean, do you see that that's a trend continuing on? And why is the SME such a large part of this? And maybe if you could just give us your definition of SME, because I believe it can be different for every organisation.
Perfect. That's an interesting question, Damien. And let's start by defining what we consider by SMEs. We look at companies that had a revenue or turnover below the 100 million. So that gives you really the lower end of what is a mid-cap organisation, all the way down to maybe 10 million, 5 million turnover companies. This is really what you would call SME broadly in the industry. You did mention in the initial remarks that 30% decline in the amount of the transactions of M&A. If you actually look at the number of transactions, you also see a big decline in Europe by 11%. But if we leave outside the bigger organizations and we concentrate on this group of SMEs, we have noticed that in the Eurozone, the number of transactions, including SMEs, and the value of those has increased by 13%. So what that shows is it's a complete reversal of the trend that you have seen across the Eurozone, and not just a reversal, I would say a very, very positive trend. It had grown by 5% in 2011, it grew by 13% in 2012. So what we see, it's quite a solid trend of the amount of M&A activity in the SME picking up, I would say, quite robustly in spite of the crisis. Because we have the Nordic focus in this chapter, when we also looked at the SME group in the Nordic companies, we saw that about 77% of all the M&A activity in the Nordics, it's driven actually by SME companies. And even in one of the countries, we actually saw something like over 90% of the M&A activity. So this is talking towards some of the ideas that Pablo was hinting towards. SMEs tend to be the hub for innovation, the hub for new brands, the hub for new IP. And I think that particularly in the Nordics, that played a role. But I would say more broadly in Europe, what we're seeing, based on conversations with our customers, based on the analysis of the transactions, that there's a lot of interest coming from Asia, coming also from India, China, Japan in particular, looking into Europe as the source for brands that will differentiate their products in the home markets, or intellectual property that will give them better products on the other end. So I think there's a bit of this, that it's really, these are some of the trends that are fueling what we're seeing today in terms of growth in M&A activity.
And I guess this is great. We're seeing a lot of detailed research here in terms of the Nordics, how that's interplaying across the region. What other plans have we got in terms of where this is progressing to the next stage? Clearly, these are global trends, but what other signs are you seeing, and where are you investing to try and increase this research?
So we have published, over the course of the end of 2012, beginning of 2013, a couple of chapters where we are taking the time to analyze EMEA in chapters, in areas where we find interesting pockets of activity. So the first region we looked into was Southern Europe, and we detected there trends pertaining private companies, which were substantially better than those of public companies, and we made a piece in that. Pablo recently did an article around M&A transactions in Middle East and Northern Africa. It's quite remarkable to see the level of activity. Nordics is also another pocket of activity. So what we will be aiming to do, in a combination of both investing in adding private company data to our platform, to our solutions, but also working with our solutions to find these areas of topical interest for our clients, we will continue to research thoroughly different aspects of Europe. One of the areas that we have on let me say, in the kitchen, in the cooking, it's looking at the UK a little bit more closely and see what we find there in terms of SME, health, M&A activity, and also probably, I would say, the German markets, Germany, Austria. I would say probably that's what we'll be looking into the medium future.
If we just add on to that as well, some of the data that we've now we can play with. We recently did a study on multinational corporations that were based in developing nations investing into the developed nations, and we saw some really interesting trends there. We saw that there was about 200%, in excess of 200% of these developing nations, multinational corporations investing into the developed world. And it increased by around about 30% for Europe as well, in the Eurozone. Mm-hmm. So this kind of data allows us to see what the trends are and follow these trends. And we're seeing a lot of fruitful kind of research come out from this data.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm sure the audience has enjoyed listening to you. And I look forward to seeing the chapter on the private equity side of the lending supply to this kind of middle market as well. Thank you.
You're welcome.